Can you hear me? Oh, perfect. So it's kind of interesting to come on stage because Peter, in his last presentation, said, well, Stanford. But guess what? I'm from Stanford. So, and then I actually had a question to ask Peter. He actually said why he's coming to Lithuania. And I just couldn't resist. I have to ask him, since all these Lithuanian women are so beautiful, did you come here to find your third wife? Just teasing. Okay. I love Lithuania so much that I've been here this is like my third or fourth time, and I'm back again to this conference. This year, I'm going to talk about startup growth challenges. I've actually been in 6 or 7 startups, and some of them made money, and some of them lost money. And some of them lost money from my very own bank account. And what I think that you learn the most from your mistakes. How many of you have remember like a recent exam or something you really screwed up? Exactly. You remember much better when you did something wrong than when you did something right, because you forget how you did it right. So I'm going to talk about some of the startups' challenges. So from the 6 or 7 startups, especially the ones that failed, there's 3 big areas that you need to really think about when you're growing your company or when you're doing a startup, or even working in one. One is value proposition. And I'll go into them in more detail. And Roman touched a lot upon this in his presentation, so we'll reinforce that. The second one is financing funding. How do you get the money? How do you manage the money? And then the last one, which I think is the absolute most important, is leadership and the organization. Most companies fail because the organization, something was wrong with it. Not because the organization, something was wrong with it, then what happens is you can't get the product right, you can't get the market right, and you fail even if you have a good idea. And then real briefly, I'll touch upon what I talked about last year, which is Silicon Valley culture. So going to the value proposition, you really have to have a big customer or need for your product, not just something interesting. So, for example, if you think about the iPad, how many people here think that Jobs was just brilliant and he did not design for a customer need? That he was just brilliant? Okay. Seemingly so, because none of us had a tablet before. And so why do we need a tablet? Well, this is really, if you look at what Jobs did, is he was very, very intuitive about people and about society. And so, how many here have accessed the internet today? Okay, better question is, how many today here have not accessed the internet today? Nobody. So we basically all need the internet to live. You need the internet to book plane tickets, you need the internet to text to message your friends, on and on. Well, what happened in society is there was a whole segment of society who are not technology natives like you. You were born into this technology. There's all these people who were born and grew up before the internet came. And for them, the internet was very scary. Like my mother, she refuses to turn on a computer because she thinks that button will explode, will cause it to explode. And so what the iPad did was it created a really user-friendly interface to the internet, primarily for the people, especially for the people who were scared of the internet. And so what I see now is all my 70-year-old and 80-year-old aunts and uncles, they're all clutching their iPads. And like, actually, my dad sleeps with his iPad now. So in that case, the example is that there was a customer need. And that's why the iPad was so hugely successful. Just some other points that everyone's been touching upon, Peter, all the other speakers, is there needs to be a market. If only 3 people need your product, it's not a big enough market to really grow your company. So you have to make sure there's enough customers, whether it's in your country, in your region, or in the world. And the last thing is that if you come up with an idea or a product that actually disrupts the market in a big way, you'll have much more likely chance of succeeding than just making something which is a little bit better. So just to look at it, one of my old bosses, he was the founder of the creative Sound Blaster card, Sim Wang Hu, he always said, if you're going to do something, you have to set a big, wild, audacious goal. So I think one of the challenges for a lot of people is when they start to do something, they're afraid of failing. And when they're afraid of failing, they actually don't set a big enough goal, because you feel more comfortable setting a goal you can achieve, right? But if you want to succeed in a big way, you have to set a goal that is not comfortable. Get out of your comfort zone. So here's a company which was developed in a university right now that I've met with recently. It's called Amsterdam Nanotech. And this is technology developed at the University of Amsterdam by a student. So how many here in this audience are students? Yeah, see? Let me tell you something. You are not too young. You don't need to get more experience. You can do something now. So this technology, what this researcher has done is that he's developed a technology so that you can take a video of molecules interacting. Okay? And right now, there is no such thing. All the technology now, like the linear accelerators, the technology only allows you to take static pictures. So, for example, recently, Cambridge University, some of the researchers there contacted Nanotech, and they said, we want to use your technology to study the interaction of a cancer drug with a cancer cell. Isn't that amazing? Like now you can study the actual interactions of medicines, and that's only one application. So if you can see, this is a picture of 2 molecules and some of the interactions between them. Okay, so think about creating a huge value proposition, when you're working on your product. Madame Curie, she's the one that discovered radioactivity. And when she did that, that led to things like the X-ray. Thomas Edison, Roman talked about Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb. And then here in Lithuania, you guys actually have some people, some organizations that have created huge value propositions. You've all met Ilya, but over at Kaunas, there was a research team that came up with some technology to clean soil, to make the soil clean from chemicals. And it won the European Innovation Award in 2011. So there's already stuff going on in Lithuania. And so you guys, I think you're the next generation. You'll be coming up with stuff. And I know there's like a whole bunch of entrepreneurs in here. And there's a group of your entrepreneurs who went on a roadshow. And they're already going global. So for those of you who haven't done it, it's your turn. So one thing when you do in developing your idea is, besides having a huge market, make sure that your product is scalable. And what I mean by that is, if you're doing a software product and you create it for one customer, make sure that you've made it easily usable with another customer. Okay? And in many ways, for those of you who are programmers, probably make your software modular so that you can take the building blocks and use it for another customer. What I find is a lot of companies, especially ones based on software, they develop software which only applies to one situation. Okay? And then when they go to a new customer, they have to start from scratch again. They have to write a brand new program for the new customer. And that's not scalable. That's not a product. That's basically a custom implementation. This company right here, Magento, they do a platform for e-commerce stores. So there's a lot of people who use them, like Nike, like North Face. They use Magento's platform for their online stores. So Magento right now powers 250,000 e-commerce sites. So this is a really good example of a company that has built a scalable product. Because I don't imagine their engineers could write 250,000 programs. And the other thing is what was it? Someone had the stats earlier. How many here have traveled out of the country? Yeah, so you guys are really getting out there and understanding it. So when you go out to when you are going to launch your product in another country, make sure you understand the local market. Go to the US, like it's brilliant. Prezi's CEO said they send people every year to the US so they understand who they're developing the product for. So it's very important to go there and understand who you're going to sell to. You can't do it from here. So here's an example this is a map of China. Okay? One of the sales guys at a company I worked at showed this map at a presentation in China, in Beijing. Okay? And the sales guy was kicked out of this presentation. He was told to leave. Do you see why? Anyone can tell me why? Okay, I see some hands. But the reason the guy was kicked out of the sales presentation was, do you see? There's a country called Taiwan. It was labeled as Taiwan. Well, China does not recognize Taiwan as a country. They're mortal enemies. And because the sales guy had a map that showed Taiwan as a country, he was kicked out of the meeting. Another example is, this is a car, and it's called Nova. It was made by Chevrolet, and it was hugely successful in the US. So Chevrolet, General Motors, decided, well, we're going to take it worldwide. And they launched the car in South America. And nobody bought it. And they couldn't understand why. It was hugely successful in the US. Well, the reason is because Nova means it doesn't go in Spanish. So who is going to buy a car that means no go? So moving on, as we talked about, make sure you know your value proposition, your customer, make sure you've developed the product for the local market, and you understand how to sell to them. Now, moving on to funding and financing, is that there's a perception that, maybe there's not very much money in Eastern Europe, there's not very much money in Lithuania, and in Silicon Valley, there's just money all over, right? But the truth of the matter is, raising money is really painful, even in the US. And what you see right here is a snapshot of a file on my computer of presentations that we gave at a company in 2005 to raise money. And we gave 100 presentations to 40 investors just to raise $10 million. It is not easy. And the founder of my company, the CEO of the company, actually had already sold a couple companies for $1 billion. So he already had the reputation. He already had the experience. But this is what it takes. And so if you get rejected by the first couple investors, that's normal. Just know that it's really difficult. And you just have to keep doing it, you know. Another comment is about when we talk about financing and making money, is an important element is to think about how your company makes money. And most people think of easy ways, the traditional ways like selling something, renting something. And one point about making money is if you're presenting to an investor, okay, don't show 10 different ways you might make money, because they actually don't like that. They want to see that you've got 1 or 2 ways to make money and you're focused on that, on 1 or 2. Because if you're trying to do too many ways or too many things at the same time, you don't have the resources and you're not focused. And then your probability of succeeding are much lower. So try and think of innovative models. In the past, one of the things that was innovative was games. Previously, you always bought games. Like Davidas was talking about how he bought games from EA in the past, right? But now, the new model is the games are free. So now the kids can sneak by their parents and get games, because before they always had to come and ask mom. And then make money a different way, like virtual goods. Another way of making money is a lot of people, startups or entrepreneurs, business people, think about selling their product, okay? But the problem is when you sell your product, your customer has to take some money out of their pocket and give it to you. And they don't even know if it's really going to help their business. So now, more and more companies, what they do is they do this thing called revenue sharing. An example is this company that I'm an advisor to. They have a software that helps e-commerce sites make more money by understanding the customer. But instead of going to their customers, here, buy our software, they said, here, install our software. And if you make money, you share your money with us. Do you see? That makes it much easier for a customer to agree to put in your product. So some business model challenges is, how many of you were born in 1998? I'm teasing, by 1998. So Google, when it came out in 1998, it was search. They didn't have any obvious way to make money. So that was a big problem, because you have a business, but you don't make money. So what is the investor going to do? Keep giving you money to pay your employees? You have to come up with a way to make money. So Google had all of its employees think about how they might be able to make money. And one of the engineers came up with AdWords, which is people can basically pay for advertising on Google. And now Google, as you know, is like a gazillion-dollar company. So they had to overcome the business model challenge. You know, if you start and you don't have a clear business model, you need to have one quick, or you will run out of money and close down. So here's some really interesting business models that evolved through history. One is is it not? Oh, uh-oh. One was the HP, right? Printers. My first printer cost me $1,500, $1,500. And my last printer cost me $100, because HP changed their business model. They started, instead of making money on selling the printer, they make money on selling the print, selling the inkjets. So now I spend $100 on my printer, and I spend $200 a year on the inkjets. So now they continually get money from me rather than one time. Zynga. So how many of you have played Farmville? Not so many? Oh, I guess it's more popular in Asia. So Zynga makes Farmville, right? Farmville is a game that you can find on Facebook. The game is free. So how do they make money? So they sell hundreds and millions of dollars on seeds, on rakes, on tractors. They sell virtual goods. And Zynga went public, and they sell hundreds of millions of dollars on virtual goods, fake things. So very interesting, huh? So moving on about finances is cash flow management. Okay. Conserve your cash. If you raise money from some of the investors that are here, okay, don't go spend it. Don't go spend it, because you always need more money than you realize, and it always takes longer than you realize. And fundraising always takes longer than you realize. And the other thing is customers are often late in paying. So if you're counting on their money to pay the bills and they don't pay, there's a lot of companies who've gone bankrupt. Not because they didn't have a good idea, but because they didn't manage their cash. They couldn't pay the bills, and they had to close down. So a lot of startups have run out of money because they ran out of cash. So the last point that I talked about was actually leadership and organization. And why is leadership important? How many of you actually want to start your own company and be the boss? Yeah, that's why you're here today, right? So, hey, raise your hand higher. Because the leadership has to have, so what does leadership mean? Is that you have to have a vision. And several of these speakers, Peter talked about having a vision to do something big and great, something that people can get excited about and follow. And then another thing they do is, besides having the vision, is making sure that the team is aligned and works together to follow the vision. I've been in several startups where the leadership were not aligned. One founder thought that we were going to go into this market. Another founder thought we were going to go into that market. And then guess what happened? The company went bankrupt. So it's really important to keep your team aligned and going the same direction. And then the last point is to make difficult decisions. You guys have heard of IBM, right? And IBM used to make laptops called the ThinkPads. But they sold their business to a company called Lenovo. They sold the laptop business to Lenovo. So one of my friends is actually the founder of Lenovo. He started his company in 1993. And then there was a crisis, and they almost ran out of money. And in order to stay running, he actually had to fire 75% of the company. So he had to fire a lot of his friends. But what that shows is that sometimes you really have to make a difficult decision. And that's your responsibility as a leader to make the difficult decisions, but that may mean the difference between success and failure. So a lot of companies have failed because of the issues with leadership. And that's why I mentioned earlier, leadership and organization are the most important things in whether or not a startup fails or succeeds. So here's some concepts to think about. Is there's a difference between leadership and management. And this will give you some examples. Okay, I showed this presentation in Lithuania before, and nobody in the presentation knew who this was. So I want to test the audience, a much bigger sample. How many people know who this is? Oh, about a third. It's Captain Kirk from Star Wars. So I guess you didn't grow up with Star Wars. So Captain Kirk was the leader, and the manager was Spock. He's the one that made sure everyone did what they were supposed to. So because I'm responding to the local market, and there's a few people who've seen this presentation before. Can you raise your hands? Okay. These are people from Startup Lithuania. Saw their presentation. So because of what you guys told me, look at my next slide. Leadership versus management. Since you guys don't know Star Wars, or is it Star Trek? Okay. Here's Star Wars. See? Luke Skywalker, he's a leader. Okay, who's the managers in Star Wars? Louder. Okay, R2-D2 and C-3PO. There's our managers in Star Wars. So this is for all those Lithuanian startups that told me they didn't know who Star Trek was. So in summary, you guys will have this presentation, but the leader sets the vision and the strategy, inspires and aligns the team, make sure the team works together, raises money, sets the organizational structure. How do people work with each other? Where does product sit? Who does what? Very importantly, recruits the top management, gets the top people to join the company. If you saw, Bill Gates recruited Steve Ballmer. Bill Gates from Microsoft recruited Steve Ballmer because Steve Ballmer was very good at running the operations of the business. And without Steve Ballmer, Bill Gates wouldn't have been as successful. And then the leader also oversees the culture. Is it a very open culture? If you look at Google or Facebook or a number of other Silicon Valley, they create this really open culture where they respect everybody's ideas and value them. If Google didn't respect their engineers' ideas, they all thought the ideas had to come from the founders, the Google founders right now would be like not rich. So, and overall, like the leader's responsible for making sure everything's working, kind of keeping an eye on everything and making sure things are running. And if there's a problem, then they address it. So, as I touched on before, making the difficult decisions and addressing tough issues. And so, this is a very US term. It's called the buck stops here. And what it means is the responsibility stops here. And if you're the CEO, if you're the leader, you have to take responsibility. You can't say, I don't know, or one of my employees did it. If you're the leader, it all comes back to you. So a little bit about the organization is that it's really important for roles and responsibilities. Make sure that you know, everyone in the company knows what their job is and their responsibilities. Because if you don't, people don't know what they're supposed to do. And it also minimizes conflict where some person thinks that another person is doing it, or thinks that, or two people are doing the same thing, and then they get mad. And I actually, believe it or not, see it a lot in startups when two people think it's their job to do the same thing, and then they get really upset. You're doing my job, you're doing my job, and it creates conflict. And then, very importantly, when people know their roles and responsibilities, it increases the speed of delivering products, and it decreases costs because you're not doing the same things. So this is something just for you to take away, is there's a book called The Founder's Dilemma, and it provides leadership insights. It's very famous, but here are some of my favorite things from this book, is 65% of startups fail because of the management team. They don't fail because the product isn't good. They don't fail because there's no market. They fail because of the management team screwed up. And so it's very important to make sure that you look at who you work with, your founders, and make sure that you're doing the same thing. Like, I actually read an article about Twitter on the flight over here, and at some point, the 4 founders disagreed, and they finally had to fire each other so that they could have only one vision. So make sure that when you're working with the people you are, that they share your same motivations and your same vision. And once again, this is more about the organization, is make sure you pay attention to the relationships with the people in your company, what their roles are, and then that they're rewarded. If someone's getting rewarded more than another person, then they're pissed, and then there's fighting rather than working together to grow your company. And the last thing is, at some point, back to leadership, that your company may grow, and you might have the skills or the mindset for a startup company and not a large company. And so 52% of the founders actually are replaced, and that's okay. Because I know a company where the founder was replaced, and they brought in a more skilled and experienced CEO, and 5 years later, the company made $1 billion. They were sold for $1 billion, and that original CEO got a lot of money because he was smart enough to leave and let someone grow the company. So now just a few last things is about Silicon Valley. So there's Stanford, and going to Stanford is actually really cool. It's really fun. I'd say Stanford, we spent more time when I was there on fun than studies, but that's okay. I'm here now. So a few things about myths about Silicon Valley is this event is about Silicon Valley comes to the Baltics. So one of the myths is it's the Valley of Gold, and the streets are lined with gold. The truth is, and I've talked about it earlier, is fundraising is really difficult. So if you're going to go to Silicon Valley, make sure that you have a very strong value proposition, that what you're offering, what your company is offering, really meets a big need and has a huge market that will buy what you're producing. Then the other thing is that the US is the best market to go to. The US is, as mentioned by, I think, Peter, is that it's the largest homogeneous market in the world. However, there's a ton of companies going there. Like every week, like next week in Silicon Valley, I know of 3 different groups of Russian entrepreneurs from completely different directions, all going to Silicon Valley, just in 1 week. So it's 3 groups, about 25 companies. So there's 75 Russian companies trying to go into the US market in Silicon Valley just next week. So everyone's going there. And so is it really the best market to go to? The truth is there's other markets, like the EU, is a huge market. Also Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, Lithuania, now that people are making more money, the Baltic states, these are all good markets. So don't only consider the US, much as, we love the US. But one thing you should do, though, is because the US, the Silicon Valley, is the place where there's a lot of new technologies and a lot of interesting people that can help your business, it's a good place to go to at least learn stuff. It's a good place to go and get ideas. But it's not necessarily the best place to go and sell your product. So. And then really quick, this is my presentation from last year. It's about culture. The things here, Silicon Valley, it has the money, it has the education, it has a lot of young talent there, but there's a lot of regions in the world like Singapore, which have the same things. They have smart people, good universities, lots of funding, but they're not as successful. And so the key to Silicon Valley success, the soft things, is actually the culture. And here are some of the things about culture in Silicon Valley. And I really went into detail last year, but this is just a reminder, is there's a lot of openness and trust. there's a lot of risk-taking. And so going back to get out of your comfort zone, do something big. It may be scary, but you'll be surprised that you can actually achieve it. Empower your team, empower people. Google wouldn't be so successful if they didn't empower their engineers to do thinking. And then share the wealth. So basically, in Silicon Valley, all the employees get benefits. A lot of people get stock options. Like one of the companies that I advise got sold 1 month ago to Staples, which is a large company, $7 billion company. And even I, as an advisor, I got a check in the mail. So it makes you want to help because the founders share the wealth. And then this is one of the last points is, after traveling a lot to different places and meeting entrepreneurs, I realized, and they pointed out to me, that Silicon Valley has a lack of jealousy. Okay? When someone does well, everyone's happy. Because guess what? That's your next source of funding, or that's a person who will give you a job. So this is a question I asked last year is, how many of you have felt jealous when someone you knew, like your friend or someone else, did really well? Yeah, come on. And jealousy is a very common sentiment, but for some reason, Silicon Valley, when people do well, they actually aren't jealous, and they just help each other more and more. And that's part of the reason I think Silicon Valley is successful. And one important thing is an attitude called relationship integrity, where you always go win, win, win. You want everybody to win. You're not just thinking about yourself winning. The founder of Groupon, Andrew Mason, I was talking with him, and I was really struck by, he really cared. He wanted everybody to win. He wanted his customers to win. He wanted the merchants to win. He wanted the consumers to win. He wanted his shareholders. He made sure that everybody benefited from Groupon. And as a result, Groupon grew really big, because there's a lot of companies who are the same business model, but they haven't been as successful because they didn't have the same attitude of making sure everybody was winning. If everybody's winning, then what happens is then everyone wants to help make the company successful. And so think about everyone you work with, how you can make sure that they all are benefiting. Don't think you need something from someone, you go to them. Think about what you can give them in return. And if you go to Silicon Valley, come with this attitude. What can you give? And last year, someone from Startup Highway came to Silicon Valley and wanted a meeting with me. And she wanted some advice. She was one of the younger people in Startup Highway. But she brought me chocolate from Lithuania. It was great, She made sure to give something in return. And come with that attitude, and you'll be much more successful. So, last comment. So, the important thing is, in the culture in Silicon Valley, people all collaborate for success, even competitors. So, thank you very much. I'm happy to be back.